Welcome to this Lenten study, questioning our grip on the cross. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Dowling. The cross is the central symbol of the Christian faith. So commonly is the cross referred to in songs, in hymns, in scripture, in prayers, and in the symbols within our churches. It has become, in effect, the water in which we swim as Christians. It has become the accepted and unquestioned centre of the Christian faith. And herein lies the problem. When something has been completely accepted unquestioningly, there is no inclination to scrutinise the presuppositions behind it. It is simply accepted without scrutiny. In this study, questioning our grip on the cross, we have an invitation to examine and to explore our own presuppositions around the cross of Jesus. The title of the study, Questioning Our Grip on the Cross, deliberately incorporates a double meaning. Firstly, questioning how tightly we cling to the cross of Jesus and why, but also how well do we grasp or understand the cross of Jesus. It is my hope that through entering into this study, we might together be able to enliven and enrich our understanding of the Christian faith and our relationship with Jesus. A word up front about this study. During the course of these 7 weeks, we'll be exploring many things. We'll be thinking of different concepts. We'll be asking what we understand, what we believe, what we think. Some people, it seems that there really isn't a great call within them to reflect on the understanding they have of their Christian faith. So deeply are they called to live that Christian faith in lives of compassion and love. Now, if you're in that category, all I ask is that I continue to be permitted to sit at your feet and to learn from and be inspired by and moved by the ways of your heart. It is my view that Christian practices, including engaging in studies such as this, are valuable insofar as they help facilitate our growth and development as human beings in the way that we can positively engage with the world around us and live lives of love and compassion with those we encounter. Now, whether this study contributes in some small way to that process remains to be seen, but one does live in hope. A final word about the questions at the end of each of these 7 studies. These questions, which will be at the end of the guidebooks and at the end of the video segments, are not in any way meant to be prescriptive, but merely suggestive. The questions that I raise may be questions that come to your own mind, or at times they may be questions that you haven't thought of but might deem worthy of exploration. The questions may perhaps at times have no particular relevance to you, and that's okay. But at other times the questions may help to move the conversation within your group and might actually help further your own inner questioning of your faith and understanding. So to the extent that the questions do in fact assist in some way, that's great. But where they don't, just simply consider them of no account and just simply discuss with your group what has moved you in the particular study. I again welcome you to this study, questioning our grip on the cross. and I hope that you appreciate study. Human beings have always had a need to make sense of the world. A critical part of this has been the survival imperative, for the more one can understand about the workings of the world, the greater are one's chances of surviving in this often dangerous world. But there is also the yearning in the human heart to ask the sort of questions that philosophy asks. What can be understood about the world? How did the world come about? What sort of stuff are we made of? What is the purpose of life? As philosophy asked more and more detailed questions, more and more disciplines and sub-disciplines spun off the mothership of philosophy. Mathematics and science, physics, chemistry and biology, and an endless series of subspecialities. All of these approaches to making sense of the world share two things in common. First, each of these approaches seeks to establish a framework for understanding, interpreting and predicting events in the world. Second, each of these approaches constructs a model to describe reality rather than representing reality itself. But what about religion? It is not unreasonable to consider religion as another path to constructing a viable model of reality. But here we begin to tread on sensitive ground. We might be willing to consider religions in general to be reasonably described as models of reality. But how open are we to considering our own religion, Christianity, as a model? I've heard numerous Christians say that Christianity is not a religion as such. Religions, they say, are human constructions, whereas Christianity is nothing less than God's revealed truth. Viewed in such a way, Christianity is no model of reality, but represents reality itself. Christianity is God's capital T truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. If this happens to be your particular position, then I would ask you, which Christianity are you claiming represents God's total truth? If you happen to be a conservative Christian, are you saying that progressive Christians also possess God's total truth? I suspect not. If you are instead a progressive Christian, are you saying that conservative Christians also possess God's total truth? Again, I suspect not. Whom then, along the very broad spectrum of Christian belief, are you saying does actually possess God's total truth? Consider the following diagram. The large central circle represents God's total religious truth. This is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, at least when it comes to religious truth. We will leave things like scientific and mathematical truths to one side. Outside this large central circle is the zone of religious falsity. Where do you, as a Christian, see your beliefs in such a diagram? Where would you draw your particular circle? Unless you happen to be an authoritarian cult leader, I suspect that you don't see your circle as being entirely coincident with God's total religious truth circle. Instead, I suspect that you might be prepared to accept that you do not grasp the totality of God's total religious truth. In other words, the circle representing your understanding is smaller than the circle of God's total religious truth. Perhaps you might sit in either of circles A1 or A2. With circle A1, you don't possess the totality of God's total religious truth, but you certainly don't have any false beliefs. What about circle A2? Again, you don't possess the totality of God's total religious truth, but possess instead some of God's religious truth, as well as having some beliefs that may be false. Do either of these circles describe you? And if not, where would you draw your circle? What about those holding Christian beliefs that differ from your own? I've kept the diagram simple by not including non-Christian religions. If we consider the very wide spectrum of Christian belief, from extreme fundamentalist to extreme progressive, where do you place people from these varying groups on the diagram? Consider circle B in comparison to yourself as circle A1. These are Christians who believe only some of what you believe. In this particular case, everything these Christians believe in opposition to you is false. In other words, whilst you have much to teach them that is true, they have nothing to teach you that is true. Consider in contrast circle C. These are some Christians who believe much, much differently to you. You see the circle of these Christians lying entirely in the zone of religious falsity. You might be tempted to call them, using a particular turn of phrase, not real Christians. All of these smaller circles, including your own, share something in common. They each seek, but fail, to represent God's total religious truth. Might I be willing then, however reluctantly, to accept the idea that my particular version of Christian faith is at best an incomplete model of God's total religious truth? If we can, this allows us the possibility, as we work through this Lenten study, of gaining new insights and perhaps even identifying underlying beliefs we hold that may be questionable. Monotheistic religions such as Judaism, Christianity and Islam face a particular challenge that polytheistic religions do not. The polytheistic religions of the ancient Greeks and Romans posited the existence of many, many gods, often at odds with one another, capricious and sometimes amoral in their behaviour, and prone to treating humans as their playthings. If the world we inhabit seems a dangerous and unpredictable place, that's hardly surprising, because it exists at the whim of the gods, and the realm of the gods, frankly, is also a bit of a mess. Monotheism, which emerged in the Middle East, offers no such easy explanation. With monotheism, the notion that there is one and only one God, the challenge of providing a religious explanation for the world we inhabit becomes extremely acute. The three monotheistic faiths believe in one all-powerful, all-loving God. This belief is challenged when it comes head-to-head with the observation that we live in a world that is, at times, dangerous, violent, and prone to natural disaster. That is, to use a much bandied term, evil. The key question we have is, why did a perfect, all-powerful, all-loving God create a world that contains evil. If God is all-loving, wouldn't that God have wanted to create a perfect world? If God is all-powerful, wouldn't that God have been able to create a perfect world? The questions above lead us, naturally, to question our starting premises. Perhaps God is all-loving, but not all-powerful. Or perhaps God is all-powerful, but not all-loving. Or perhaps those things we deem as evil are not actually evil at all. Any way you cut it, the belief in a God who is both powerful, all-powerful, and all-loving, coupled with the existence of evil in a world created by such a God, creates a problem. Theologians give this particular problem a name, the Theodicy problem. Consider the following diagram. The broken circle that is theodicy, the problem of evil in a world created by an all-powerful and all-loving God. Attempts by the monotheistic religions to solve the Theodicy problem are, within their monotheistic frameworks, models to explain the world we actually live in. The question that begs explanation, that the world that this one all-powerful, all-loving God has created is frankly a bit of a mess. There is much angst on the part of certain Christian theologians when it comes to the subject of theodicy. They wring their hands over the idea that the God of the Bible, whom they assert is all-powerful and all-loving, could possibly have created a world that exhibits certain less than all-loving aspects, such as, for instance, human beings that make a habit of killing each other. How is it, they ask, that the all-loving God of the Bible could create such a world? Perhaps, though, there is less reason for puzzlement than these theologians seem to indicate. Before continuing in your printed texts of this study, we're going to flip to the very end, which is the appendix to Study 1. The all-loving God of the Bible. I would advise you to take some slow, deep breaths before continuing. This is a very limited sampling from the Old Testament. Psalm 13, verse 5. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. Psalm 36, verse 5. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Psalm 63, verse 3. Your unfailing love is better than life itself. How I praise you. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 to 3. Samuel said to Saul, Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in opposing the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both men and women, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 to 17. But as for the towns of these people that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you must not let anything that breathes remain alive. You shall annihilate them. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, just as the Lord your God has commanded. And finally from Numbers chapter 31, verses 15 to 18. Moses said to them, "Have you allowed all the women to live? These women here, on Balaam's advice, made the Israelites act treacherously against the Lord in the affair of Peor, so that the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man by sleeping with him. But all the young girls who have not known a man by sleeping with him, keep alive for yourselves." We interrupt normal transmission with a news flash from Sunday school. Miss, I think I might have solved the Theodicy problem." "Yes, Johnny?" "Well, the Old Testament shows God as being loving, but it also shows God as being really angry at times. And sometimes when God is really angry, God lashes out and, well, God just wants to kill a lot of people and wants the Israelites to kill a lot of people too. So, Miss, if we believe the Bible, then maybe God isn't all loving all the time after all. Maybe that would explain why we aren't either." "Johnny, wash your mouth with soap and water." Have we indeed solved the Theodicy problem? After reading such texts in which God is depicted at times as being loving, most certainly, but at times as being hateful and violent, is it really so hard to understand such a God creating a world that is at times hateful and violent? If we believe in the veracity of these texts, is not the Theodicy problem instantly solved? If we believe in the veracity of these texts, does not the ambivalence of human nature, that we can be both loving and violent, simply mirror the biblically depicted ambivalence in the divine nature? What to do with the texts of divine violence? And pointedly, to pose the bumper sticker question, WWJD ? What would Jesus do if given a knife by Moses and told that it was God's will that he cut the throats of the Midianite infant boys? Oh, sorry, I'm just writing a suicide note. I have to say, I'm feeling very, very depressed. No, I am not going to be depressed, because I am, as are you, a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, and I am inspired and uplifted by the God of love he revealed in his life, in his person, and in his ministry. Yes, I am inspired. by the all-loving God I see revealed in Jesus of Nazareth. It's important for me to say at this point in the study, please hang in there. If you're feeling terminally depressed, don't be. Your response to these very uncomfortable texts is entirely understandable. When it comes to texts such as the ones we've been considering, you might actually prefer to have nothing to do with them. You might prefer to look away from them. You might prefer that sermons and perhaps studies like this steered away from them because they make you feel uncomfortable. You may also feel that such texts have absolutely nothing to do with your Christian faith, centred in the life and the person of Jesus of Nazareth. And if so, I empathise with you very, very much. Such texts also make me very uncomfortable. Such texts do not inspire and motivate my Christian life. I am drawn instead to the God of love revealed in Jesus. And it's actually my hope that rather than depressing us, that this Lenten study might actually, if we bear with it, lead us and uplift us into a deeper relationship with Jesus. So, you might at this stage be asking yourself, why then are we spending this time looking at these hideous texts in this very strange thing called the Bible, this collection of 66 books? Why are we focusing on these horrible texts? And that is a very good question. It is the assertion of this Lenten study that the unquestioned background acceptance of these biblical texts of violence masquerading as the will of God contribute ultimately to our acceptance of theologies of violence surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus. If we are to recognise violence that is rarely named as such, it is important, therefore, that we sensitise ourselves to violence from the outset. That is the purpose of looking, with no hint of averting our gaze, from these overt examples of divine violence in the biblical text. As we continue through this study series, we shall find ourselves following two different threads: the thread of violence and the thread of love. An acceptance of violence, both in our world and in our theology, leads inexorably to further violence. In contrast, a rejection of violence in all its forms, including theological violence, follows the path of love and holds enduringly to the fundamental reality of an all-loving God. Both these threads of violence and of love will lead us ultimately to the cross. Our reflection questions for Study 1. And once again, these are not prescriptive, they are suggestive questions if they prove helpful in your group discussion. The first being relating to the truth circles diagram. How helpful or unhelpful are such diagrams in navigating our differences in belief? Have you ever previously thought of your Christian understanding as an incomplete model, which is open to being updated? Is this religious understanding as a model concept helpful or unhelpful? And if so, how? The second question, relating to the ambivalence in God's behaviour as depicted in the Bible. How do you feel when you read Old Testament passages such as those in the appendix? How do you respond to the threads of divine love and divine violence? Are the passages depicting divine violence consistent with the God of love that you see revealed in Jesus of Nazareth? On the occasions you encounter them, how do you make sense of such passages? The third question, do we ever use the Richard Nixon defence to defend God? The Richard Nixon defence is based on the famous line from President Richard Nixon in his interviews with David Frost, defending his actions in the Watergate conspiracy. When the president does it, it's not illegal. Can the Richard Nixon defence ever be applied to God's behaviour? If God does it, then it's not unloving, violent, murder, genocide. Does an evil act somehow become a good act if God commands it? Or is evil, such as the murder of defenceless children, always intrinsically evil? How do you feel when people, whether it's laypersons or ministers, seek to justify what you deem indefensible behaviours by God in the Bible? How do you feel when Old Testament passages, such as those in the appendix, are avoided or glossed over? Are you relieved? Or do you think it's a cop-out? Question 4. What of the Theodicy problem? What do you think about the Theodicy problem? How do you reconcile the existence of a less than perfect world with its creation by a perfect, all-powerful and all-loving God? Do you question whether God is indeed all-powerful? Might there be some things that God is simply powerless to do or to prevent? Do you continue to hold to the notion of an all-loving God? Or do you question at times whether God is indeed all-loving? How do you view the less than satisfactory nature of existence? Do you see this as implying a deficiency on God's part as Creator?